good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. Give me a moment and I will share my slides. All right. All right. Hopefully that's visible to everyone.
Looks good.
I see some yeses. Okay, great. So again, I'm Albert Presto from Carnegie Mellon. Uh, Sina Hasheminassab is also joining us from JPL. Um, and we're going to talk about a few different projects that we're working on, some independently and some in collaboration. That's really, the aims are about understanding air quality and pollutant sources and providing policy relevant information worldwide. Um, sorry. So some of our goals here for this one particular project that I'm leading, we want to get a better understanding of composition and sources of air pollution and specifically PM 2.5. Um, we want to build a community of stakeholders communicating about this. And of course, we don't want to, we're not like looking to replace anything or, Epic has already done a great job of building that community. So we're trying to, leverage existing communities or sort of improve, add additional information to some of these communities that already exist, and then provide actionable data. So, as I'm sure many or most of you are aware, PM 2.5 is emitted by a bunch of different sources. Some of those sources are, of course, on-road traffic, like the diesel truck on the left, biomass burning of different types, whether it's, you know, burning for heating or burning for cooking or burning for land clearing, um, and then industrial sources. And what I'm showing on the right are examples of an industrial source in the top right that's burning that's using fossil fuels as the fuel. You can actually see the coal pile in the foreground of that photo. And then some industrial sources actually use biomass to as their fuel source. So that's a brick kiln in the bottom right, and there are definitely examples that we can find of brick kilns that burn wood. Um, and we'll also see that, so all of these are PM sources, and they're all emitting PM that is visible because it absorbs light, and that becomes important in a moment here. Now, PM impacts health and it impacts climate. So on the left, here I'm showing the dose response curve for PM 2.5. This is from data collected in the US, but we know that, you know, people are people, increasing exposure to PM 2.5 increases a number of health impacts, including shortening people's lifespans or increasing their odds of death. And that's what's shown on the left. And then on the right, there are a few different ways that PM can impact climate, especially these particles that can absorb light. So when these sources emit these particles that are black or brown and that you could see in those photos on the previous slide, for example, when those particles deposit on snow and ice, that snow and ice goes from being bright and reflective to being dark and melting faster. Also, when those dark colored particles are emitted into the atmosphere of a city, for example, they can actually locally warm that atmosphere and interfere with precipitation patterns. Uh, and while there's growing data on air quality in a lot of the world, there's a big lack of actionable air quality data, right? Data that informs sources or data that can be used to sort of impact policies. One of the things that my group has been doing, and this is through a project funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation, is to take advantage of existing PM 2.5 measurements worldwide. And so this map shows a number of locations where we've already built collaborations with people who have PM 2.5 measurements. A lot of these were or potentially still are, U.S. embassies and U.S. consulates, because the U.S. embassies used to have up until about a year ago, had a pretty robust network of locations measuring PM 2.5. But other of these are not. Other of these are collaborators who are not associated with U.S. embassies. Specifically, these locations all have a BAM or a beta attenuation monitor to measure PM 2.5. And so for those who are familiar with the BAM, it's an instrument that collects particles onto a filter tape and measures PM 2.5 mass concentration every hour. And so the photo on the right shows the tape from the BAM, and then the BAM is the BAM itself is what's in the center of the slide. And so on that filter tape, each of those spots represents 1 hour of data. And you can just see from the, naked eye that some of those spots are a little bit darker and some of them are lighter. And what we're able to do is take advantage of that sort of darkness or lightness, or whether it's the spot is grayer or blacker, to get a sense of how much of this light absorbing material, how much of this black carbon material that we see emitted by the diesel truck, for example, is present in the air at any 1 hour. So what we do is we photograph those individual spots. And so we either obtain the tapes from our partners, or the partners can um, do this analysis on their own, and I'll show you that in a few slides. But what we do is we just use a cell phone camera and we photograph each spot, and we always give the spot the same background. So we have this piece of paper that has all these different colored boxes on it. We photograph each spot against that sort of reference background, and then we're able to estimate how much black carbon there is, how much of this light absorbing material there is in the PM 2.5 for each hour. And so here's an example of what one tape looks like. So we obtained this tape from the US Embassy in Accra, Ghana. This is just a time series. So the red line here is the PM 2.5 measurement as reported by the BAM, and the yellow line is the black carbon from our method. And so if you just sort of look at it broadly, you could see lots of ups and downs, right? So PM 2.5 sort of goes up and down each day, and black carbon also goes up and down each day. You can see that sort of if you look at the overall time series, but also at the little zoom in here, right? We can see sort of PM 2.5 going up in the morning during rush hour, black carbon goes up at the same time. They go down at night. They go up in the morning, they go down at night. And that's because Accra is a place with a lot of traffic and a lot of other burning, and so we get a lot of this black carbon that's associated with people's activities. Now, there are periods when PM 2.5 and black carbon are less well correlated. So you can see that over here, sort of in the middle of February. Um, there's a big dust event. So this is the Harmattan wind. So this brings a bunch of dust from the Sahara. And so we get a big increase in PM 2.5 that isn't necessarily associated with black carbon, right? And so having black carbon in addition to PM 2.5 lets us start understanding what some of the important sources are, and what some of the drivers are for changes in PM 2.5 sort of day to day or even within a day. When we look across a bunch of locations, there is high black carbon concentration in the places where we've done data analysis in Africa and Asia. So I'm starting here. This bar on the right shows the average black carbon concentration in Pittsburgh, which is the city where I am and where my university is. And that's about half a microgram per cubic meter. If we add to that several locations where we've analyzed BAM tapes for Africa and Asia, we see much higher concentrations, sort of a factor of 8 to 10 or even more higher than what you get in a typical city in North America. In a few locations, for example, here in Addis Ababa, we actually have two locations in the same city, and I want to dive into that. So we have two locations in Addis Ababa, and the concentrations are very different, and that reflects the activity that's happening near those particular locations. So here's a map of Addis Ababa, and one of the locations where we have measurements is at the U.S. Embassy. And then the other is it's at this site called Jackros, which is the warehouse for the embassy. And again, I'll pop up the bars. And so the concentrations are higher at Jackros than at the embassy. And they're significantly higher at Jackros. Now I'll point out, I'm not using the data from the exact same year, but it's the same month and the same season, right? But higher concentrations in Jackros. And we know that part of that has to do, well, we know there's more traffic and there's more diesel traffic at Jackros, and the data are going to sort of bring that out. So one of the things we can do is, because we have these hourly measurements, we can actually construct diurnal patterns of BC concentrations. So what we can do is for every tape that we have, we can take the average of all the time periods between midnight and 1 a.m. and 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. and etc. and build a pattern for a typical day. And so for at the site of the embassy, here's what that typical daytime pattern looks like. Low concentrations at night, and then a rapid increase in concentrations in the morning that are associated with the morning rush hour, goes down a little bit in the middle of the day, rises up again in the evening, again associated with potentially the evening rush hour, and then concentrations fall overnight. When we do the same exercise for Jack Roast, we get a similar pattern, but it's more pronounced. So first of all, the overnight concentrations at Jack Roast are higher than at the embassy. And then those two spikes associated with the morning and afternoon rush hour are much more pronounced, right? And again, we know there's more traffic and more diesel activity at Jack Roast, and the data sort of bring that out, right? We get this stronger peak in the morning and a much stronger peak in the afternoon at Jack Roast than at the embassy site. We're also able to look at the actual photos themselves to get some idea of whether this black carbon material is coming from fossil fuels or from biomass burning. Um, Whenever we take a photo, we get three pieces of information. We get, if you've ever heard of photos being RGB, there's a red value, there's a green value, and there's a blue value. And what we can do is use the red and the green and the blue to make a determination between how much of the black carbon that we measure is from fossil fuel sources and from biomass burning sources. And that's because in a fossil fuel source, like our diesel truck here on the right, the material coming out of that smokestack from that diesel truck is really truly black. The combustion is controlled, and we would call that material pretty much purely black. When wood or biomass is burned, the combustion conditions are different. They're not as controlled. And you can even see in the smoke there, right? The smoke from that wood fire has different colors in it. Some of that's because we're boiling off water in the wood, but some of it is because there's these other materials that are end up in the particles, and we call that material brown, which is why the little circle there has a black core and a brown outside. But the material, the particles from the diesel truck and the particles from the wood fire are going to photograph a little bit differently. And so what we're able to do is take this data that we have at these two locations, for example, and then apportion this central part between how much of the black carbon is from fossil fuel combustion and how much is from biomass burning. And so what we see here is that the biomass burning contribution is about the same in each location. And the way we're interpreting that is that there are biomass sources all around Addis Ababa. August is the cold season there, so this might be people heating their homes. It might be people be using biomass for cooking. And that is maybe spread across the whole city, and so we get similar concentrations of these two locations. And then the fossil fuel part is the remainder. That's the part that's colored black. And again, we know there's a big difference in traffic between Embassy and Jack Roast, and that's shown in the excess black carbon at Jack Roast is associated with fossil fuels. So this is the sort of information that we're able to provide. We also, in some cases, we're working on ways to do additional chemical analyses to these filter tapes, and that'll bring more information to the table. So the benefits to groups that have participated so far is that you get this additional information about pollution, and we're starting to provide source information. We generate site-specific reports, so you can see in the screenshot here, this is from our Slack channel. You can join the Slack channel and see the reports from other locations. So here are reports you can see from Accra and from Dushanbe, which are different embassy locations that have provided us tapes. And getting involved is pretty easy. If you're interested, you know, you can contact me after the webinar and I can provide the link to the Slack channel. And if you have a BAM or you know someone who has a BAM and they're interested in the sample analysis, there's really two paths to participate in the analysis. One path, which is what I focused on so far, is that we do the analysis. So we're set up in our lab to do this analysis. Many of the embassy sites have shipped us the BAMs, and we pay for the shipping, and we can help handle all the logistics. And then we do the analysis and we provide you with the report and the data. The second path, and some of our colleagues who own their own BAMs have gone down this path, is that we will train your team on photographing the filter samples. And we have a few different ways to share the analysis software. One is we can send you the Python scripts that do it. But within the last few weeks, we've also developed a web interface for this. And so this is just an example showing that, and this is good if you have a small number of photos. We have a website where you can upload the individual photos and it analyzes them for you. So this is an example. These are a couple filters that I collected as part of a different project, and I uploaded the photos and just to show you that this tool exists. Um, Regardless of which way folks are interested in interacting with us, we can and do have follow-up meetings, and we can tailor all of the reports to sort of meet the needs of the different stakeholders, because every location has different needs and has different information that they're most interested in. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Sina and let him talk about MAIA.
All right, thanks, Albert. Hi, everyone. Since we are together here talking about particulate matter and its composition, I wanted to talk about a satellite investigation called MAIA, which is complementary to the approach that Albert talked about. But here we bring in additional measurements, such as those from satellite remote sensing, as well as outputs of chemical transport model to provide broader picture of the particulate matter and its composition in different parts of the world. So MAIA is a NASA investigation which is primarily focusing on assessing the health impacts of exposure to different types of particulate matter. This is actually the first time that NASA has partnered with health researchers from the beginning to consider their feedback and input in design and implementation of a satellite investigation. So once MAIA is fully operational, it's going to generate daily concentration maps of ground level total PM2.5 and PM10, as well as major chemical components of PM2.5, including sulfate, nitrate, dust, as well as elemental anorganic carbon at 1 kilometer spatial resolution in 12 selected metropolitan areas around the world, which I'll talk about in the next few slides. Um, you can learn more about the MAIA investigation at its website that you can see on this slide. Another way that you can be involved in this investigation is through joining the early adopter program. I mean, there is a link at the bottom of this slide that you can go to, or just to scan the QR code. By joining the early adopter program, you get access to some additional data sets that are currently only available to the people that are part of that program. Specifically, we have generated simulated data products, which again, later I'll show some examples of that you can access. In addition to that, we regularly send updates and hold workshops or trainings that if you become part of this program, you get those updates and emails, and we can stay in touch more closely about the potential application of the MAIA data in your particular case. Next slide, please. So at very high level, this slide summarizes the key elements of the MAIA investigation. We have developed and built a satellite instrument at JPL, which is now ready to be launched, though the launch is not going to happen before November of 2027. In the meantime, we have established a network of surface monitors at selected regions around the world. That network is now fully operational and the data is publicly available. In addition to that, we are generating or running chemical transport models, specifically WRF Chem, at each of the selected regions that are of the focus for the MAIA investigation. And again, I will talk more about those regions in the next slide. But the data from these first three elements that you see on this slide are integrated into a so-called geostatistical regression model. And using that model, we can generate the daily concentration maps that I mentioned earlier. We have a number of health researchers on the project who are going to use these outputs in a number of epidemiological studies to assess the health impacts of exposure to specific types and chemical composition of particulate matter. Next slide. So Unlike many other low Earth orbit satellite missions that typically have global coverage, MAIA focuses on selected regions around the world. We call those regions as target areas, and each target area is roughly 360 by 480 kilometer, and you can see the location of those target areas on the map on the right-hand side. Generally speaking, we have two main categories of target areas. The first category, we refer to them as primary target areas or PTAs. Those are the blue markers on the map. These are the regions that have been selected by the MAIA science team, essentially to do the health studies. And these are the regions that we are going to collect satellite data, surface data. We are going to run chemical transport models in them. And these are the regions that we are going to produce all levels of data, which are eventually the daily concentration maps gap field at a 1 kilometer resolution. In addition to that, we have another category of target areas. We call them secondary target areas or STAs, the green markers on the map. These are the regions that the MAIA satellite will collect data, but the MAIA project itself may not necessarily uh, process that data beyond level one, which is just the satellite imagery. That being said, all MAIA data will be publicly available to the research community so that they can go grab that data and do their own research. And one could actually replicate what the MAIA team is doing in the primary target areas, but in the secondary target areas to generate those concentration maps that I mentioned earlier. Next slide. So I mentioned earlier that we have generated simulated data products. The idea behind this is to essentially let the research community to become familiar with the structure and format of the level 4 MAIA data. So we currently have this data only for one of those primary target areas, which is located in Northeast US. And that data covers the entire year of 2018. And so just to give you a better sense of how the MAIA data will look like, I put these maps on this slide, which show the annual average maps of total PM 2.5 as well as its major chemical composition. Next slide. And also to show the granularity of the data, here I zoomed into an area over New York City, and I picked two different days. One, a polluted day, which is shown on the left-hand side on August 28th, 2018. And I picked one of the components of PM 2.5, elemental carbon, which is a good tracer for traffic and other combustion sources. On the right-hand side, I picked a cleaner day over the same region, November 28th, 2018. And again, here you can clearly see the levels of details that combination of satellite, surface, and chemical transport model can provide, particularly through the MAIA investigation. I believe that was my last slide. Yeah. And so here are contact information. Again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and especially if you're interested in being involved in either of these two projects. These are our contact information. Thanks.